There are places in the American frontier where the living and the dead share the same dust, the same silence, the same thirst. Nevada in 1874 was such a place, a vast expanse of alkali flats and jagged mountains, where silver veins ran deep beneath the earth, like frozen rivers of hell, and men came from every corner of the world to tear fortunes from stone. They called it the Silver State, but those who lived there long enough knew another name for it: the land of broken promises, the territory of ghosts. The desert there was not like the deserts of the South, with their saguaro cacti and scorpions and rattlesnakes coiled beneath stones. This was a high desert, 7,000 feet above the sea, where the air was thin enough to make a man's lungs burn and his heart race with the slightest exertion. In summer, the sun beat down with merciless intensity, turning the ground to powder and cracking the skin of anyone foolish enough to work without a hat. In winter, the snow came down in sheets, burying the sagebrush and turning the landscape into a vast white emptiness that could swallow a man whole. But it was the autumn that was worst, that in-between time when the seasons warred with each other, when morning frost gave way to afternoon heat, when the wind never stopped blowing and the dust never settled. That was when the land showed its true face, when you could feel the presence of all the men who had died there, their bones scattered across the hills, their dreams turned to ash and blown away on the wind. Some said you could hear them at night, calling out from the darkness, warning the living to turn back, to leave this cursed place while they still could. Most did not listen. Most never do. In the autumn of that year, the town of Desolation Flats clung to existence in the shadow of the Humboldt Range, 20 miles north of the Carson River. It was not marked on most maps. Travelers who stumbled upon it by accident often wished they had not. The town consisted of perhaps 40 structures, most of them false-fronted buildings that leaned against the wind like drunken men. A general store, a telegraph office that rarely functioned, a boarding house where the sheets were changed once a month if you were lucky, a livery stable where the horses seemed to watch you with something approaching pity. And at the far end of the main street, past the undertaker's parlor and the assay office, stood the Silver Spur Saloon. The building had been there longer than anyone could remember. Some said it predated the town itself, that the first prospectors had found it already standing, its doors locked, its windows dark. Others claimed it had been built by a gambler from San Francisco who had won a fortune in Virginia City and lost it all in a single night of cards. The truth, like so many truths in that part of the world, had been buried beneath years of silence and dust. What everyone agreed upon was this: the Silver Spur Saloon was not like other establishments. It did not open during the day. The proprietor, a man named Silas Crane, kept the doors locked and the shutters drawn until the sun had fully set. And even then, even after darkness had claimed the desert, the saloon remained closed until the stroke of midnight. Not a minute before, not a second earlier. This is the account of what happened to a man named Thomas Mercer, who came to Desolation Flats in October of 1874, seeking work as a carpenter. He was 32 years old, a veteran of the war between the states. He had fought for the Union, had seen friends torn apart by canister shot at Antietam, had walked through fields of the dead at Gettysburg. He thought he had seen the worst that human existence could offer. He was wrong. Mercer had been many things before the war. A farmer's son in Pennsylvania, an apprentice to a master carpenter in Philadelphia, a young man with ambitions and dreams and a sweetheart who waited for him while he learned his trade. But the war had changed all that. When he returned from the fighting, the sweetheart had married someone else, a banker who had paid for a replacement and stayed home. The carpentry shop where he had trained had burned down. His parents had both died of fever while he was away. There was nothing left for him in Pennsylvania, nothing but memories and ghosts. So he went west, like so many others, looking for a new start, looking for a place where his past would not follow him. He had worked his way across the country, taking jobs where he could find them. Cincinnati, St. Louis, Kansas City, each town the same as the last, each job paying just enough to keep him fed and sheltered until the work ran out and he had to move on again. He was a good carpenter, skilled with his hands, able to look at a piece of wood and see what it could become. But skill alone did not guarantee steady work in the years after the war. There were too many men like him, veterans looking for employment, willing to work for less than they were worth. The competition was fierce. The opportunities were few. Mercer arrived on a Thursday evening, riding a paint horse he had purchased in Carson City with the last of his savings. The animal was old and tired, much like Mercer himself. He had been traveling for weeks, following rumors of construction work in the mining towns that dotted the Nevada wilderness. A new shaft was being dug outside Desolation Flats. Someone had told him. They needed men who could shore up timbers, build head frames, construct the infrastructure of extraction. Mercer was good with wood and nails. He could make a straight cut in the dark. He could drive a spike with 3 swings of a hammer. These were skills that mattered on the frontier. He found lodging at the boarding house, a narrow structure that smelled of lye soap and unwashed bodies. The proprietress was a widow named Mrs. Calloway, a woman with gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin across her skull. She showed him to a room on the 2nd floor, a space barely large enough for a cot and a washstand. The window looked out onto the main street, and from that vantage point, Mercer could see almost the entire town, including the Silver Spur Saloon. That first night, he lay on the cot and watched the sky turn from violet to black. The stars emerged one by one, cold and distant. He could hear the wind moving through the gaps in the walls, a low moan that never quite ceased. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, and another answered. The sounds of the desert night, the sounds of isolation. He did not sleep well. The mattress was thin and lumpy, filled with straw that poked through the ticking. Every time he shifted position, the cot frame creaked loud enough to wake him. But it was not the discomfort that kept him awake. It was the silence, the unnatural quiet that settled over the town after dark, as if every living thing had retreated into hiding. And then, at exactly midnight, he heard it, the sound of a door opening, the creak of hinges that needed oil. He rose from the cot and moved to the window, pressing his face against the glass. Down below, on the street, the doors of the Silver Spur Saloon stood open. Light spilled out onto the dirt, warm and golden. He could hear music, the tinny sound of a piano, playing a melody he did not recognize, and voices, men talking and laughing, the sounds of a busy establishment. He watched for perhaps 10 minutes. Figures moved past the windows, shadows cast against the interior walls. Someone shouted something he could not make out, and several voices responded with laughter. It seemed like any other saloon in any other frontier town, except for the fact that it had been completely dark and silent just moments before. Mercer returned to his cot and lay down again, listening to the distant sounds of revelry. He told himself it was none of his business. He had come to Desolation Flats to work, not to investigate the peculiar operating hours of a drinking establishment. But sleep would not come. The piano music continued, note after note, falling into the darkness like drops of water into a well. The next morning, he inquired about work at the mine. The foreman, a thick-shouldered man named Dutch Harrison, told him they could use another carpenter. The pay was $2 a day, 6 days a week. He would work from dawn until dusk, shoring up the tunnel walls, building support structures, repairing equipment. It was hard labor, dangerous labor, but it was employment. Mercer accepted. That evening, after his first day of work, he stopped at the general store to purchase supplies: tobacco, matches, a small bottle of whiskey to take the edge off the ache in his shoulders. The store was run by a man named Jessup, a skeletal figure with fingers stained yellow from years of handling sulfur and mercury. They made small talk, while Jessup wrapped the items in brown paper. The weather, the quality of the ore being pulled from the mine, the likelihood of the railroad extending a spur line to Desolation Flats. As Mercer was leaving, he paused at the door and turned back. "Tell me something," he said. "The saloon down the street, the Silver Spur. Why does it only open at midnight?" Jessup's hands stopped moving. He looked up, his eyes meeting Mercer's, and for a moment there was something in his expression that might have been fear. Or perhaps it was pity. "Best not to ask questions about that place," he said quietly. "Best to keep your curiosity to yourself." Mercer waited for more, but Jessup had already turned away, busying himself with rearranging items on a shelf that did not need rearranging. The conversation was over. He walked back to the boarding house as the sun sank behind the mountains. The temperature dropped quickly once the light was gone. He could see his breath in the air. Inside his room, he lit the oil lamp and sat on the edge of the cot, smoking and thinking. The warning from Jessup bothered him, not because it frightened him, but because it suggested there was something worth being frightened of. He ate a cold dinner of bread and dried beef, washing it down with water from the pitcher. Then he lay down, fully clothed, and waited. The room grew darker. The sounds of the town faded away, and at midnight once again he heard the doors of the Silver Spur Saloon swing open. This time, he did not merely watch from the window. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his coat, and went downstairs. Mrs. Calloway was nowhere to be seen. The boarding house was silent. He stepped out onto the street and began walking toward the saloon. The night was cold and clear. The moon hung low and full, casting everything in shades of silver and black. His footsteps echoed on the hard-packed dirt. As he drew closer to the Silver Spur, he could hear the music more clearly now. The piano was playing something slow and mournful, a tune that seemed to pull at something deep in his chest. He could hear voices as well, men talking in low tones, the clink of glasses, the scrape of chairs. He reached the entrance and paused. The doors stood open, but he could not see inside. The light that spilled out was too bright, too diffuse. It was like looking into fog. He stood there for a long moment, listening, gathering his courage. Then he stepped across the threshold. The interior of the Silver Spur Saloon was larger than it had appeared from the outside. Much larger. The bar ran the entire length of the left wall, polished mahogany that gleamed in the lamplight. Behind it stood row upon row of bottles, more varieties of liquor than Mercer had ever seen in one place. There were bottles of whiskey from Kentucky and Tennessee, rum from the Caribbean, brandy from France, tequila from Mexico. Some of the bottles looked ancient, covered in dust, their labels faded beyond reading. Others looked new, as if they had just been uncorked for the first time. Tables were scattered throughout the room, and nearly every chair was occupied. Men in dusty clothes sat playing cards, drinking, talking. Their clothing was from different eras, Mercer realized. Some wore the rough canvas trousers and flannel shirts of miners. Others wore frock coats and cravats, of the attire of gamblers and merchants. A few wore military uniforms, both Union and Confederate. The blue and gray faded but still recognizable. It was as if the room contained men from every decade of the frontier's history, all gathered in one impossible space. In the far corner, an upright piano sat against the wall, and a man in a black vest sat at the keys. his fingers moving across them with practiced ease. The tune he played was melancholy and strange, in a minor key that made Mercer's skin prickle. The melody seemed to loop back on itself, never quite resolving, always leaving the listener waiting for a conclusion that never came. Above the piano hung a painting in a tarnished gold frame, depicting a landscape that Mercer did not recognize. Mountains beneath a blood-red sky, a river running black as ink, trees with twisted branches reaching up like skeletal fingers. The air inside the saloon was thick and heavy, despite the chill outside. It smelled of tobacco smoke and spilled liquor and something else, something Mercer could not quite identify. A sweet, cloying scent, like flowers left too long in a vase, like decay dressed up in perfume. The lamplight flickered constantly, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources, sliding across walls and pooling in corners. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly as a saloon should look. But there was something wrong. Something Mercer could not quite identify at first. He stood just inside the doorway, letting his eyes adjust, trying to understand what was bothering him. And then he realized no one had looked up when he entered. Not a single person had turned to see who had walked through the door. In a frontier town, where strangers were rare and arrivals noteworthy, that was unusual. More than unusual. It was impossible. He moved toward the bar, his boots loud on the wooden floor. Still, no one looked at him. The conversations continued uninterrupted. The card games went on. The piano player kept playing. It was as if Mercer did not exist. Behind the bar stood a tall man with silver hair and a face like carved stone. He was polishing a glass with a white cloth, holding it up to the light, inspecting it for spots. This, Mercer assumed, was Silas Crane, the proprietor. He approached the bar and waited. Crane continued polishing the glass, his movements slow and deliberate. "Whiskey," Mercer said. Crane did not respond, did not look up, did not acknowledge the request in any way. Mercer cleared his throat and spoke louder. "I said I would like a whiskey." This time, Crane paused. He set down the glass and the cloth. He looked up, and when his eyes met Mercer's, there was something in them that made the carpenter's blood run cold. They were gray eyes, pale as winter ice, and they held no warmth, no recognition, no life. "We are not open to your kind," Crane said. His voice was soft, but it carried across the entire room. The piano stopped playing. The conversations ceased. Every man in the saloon turned to look at Mercer, and that was when he saw them clearly for the first time. That was when he understood. The men sitting at the tables were not alive. They could not be. Their skin had the pallor of old wax, gray and waxy in the lamplight. Their eyes were sunken deep in their skulls, ringed with shadow that looked like bruises. Some bore visible wounds that should have killed them, wounds that had killed them. A man near the window had a dark stain spreading across his shirt front, right where his heart should be. The fabric was soaked through, and Mercer could see the ragged hole beneath, could see the pale flesh and the glimpse of bone. Another had a rope burn around his neck, the skin raw and torn, his head tilted at an unnatural angle that suggested his neck had been broken. A third was missing part of his skull, the bone shattered and gone, and Mercer could see into the hollow space where his brain should have been. There was nothing there but darkness. Others showed signs of death in different ways. A man at the nearest table had skin the color of charcoal, as if he had burned alive. His hands were blackened stumps, the fingers fused together by flame. Yet he held his cards with these ruined hands, studying them with eyes that had no whites, only dark pools like tar. At another table, a man with a crushed chest wheezed as he breathed, each inhalation making a wet, rattling sound. Mercer could see his ribs through his shirt, could see how they bent inward where something heavy had fallen on him and caved in his chest. A mining accident, perhaps, or a rock slide. Near the back, partially hidden in shadow, sat a figure that Mercer could barely look at. The man's face had been shot away, leaving only the lower jaw and a cavity of darkness where his features should have been. Yet somehow he was drinking, tilting his glass back and pouring whiskey into the void, and Mercer could hear the liquid splashing against what remained of his throat. These were dead men, corpses animated by some force Mercer could not comprehend, and they were all staring at him. He took a step backward, then another. His hand moved instinctively to his hip, where his revolver should have been, but he had not worn it. He had left it in his room, thinking he would not need it for a simple visit to a saloon. "You should leave," Crane said. His tone was not threatening. It was simply stating a fact. This place is not for the living, not during our hours of operation. Mercer wanted to speak, wanted to ask what this was, what devilry was at work here, but his throat had closed up. He could not force words past the tightness in his chest. He turned and walked toward the door, fighting the urge to run. Behind him, he heard the piano start up again, heard the conversations resume, as if nothing had happened, as if he had been nothing more than a mild interruption. He stumbled out into the street and kept walking until he reached the boarding house. His hands were shaking, his heart hammered against his ribs. Inside his room, he locked the door and pushed the washstand against it for good measure. Then he sat on the cot and tried to make sense of what he had seen. It could not be real. He had been tired, but the altitude, the thin air, it could play tricks on a man's mind. He had heard stories of prospectors who spent too long in the mountains, who began seeing things that were not there. Ghosts, demons, manifestations of their own guilt and fear. Perhaps that was all it had been. A hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But he knew, even as he tried to convince himself, that it was a lie. What he had seen in the Silver Spur Saloon had been real as the floor beneath his feet, as real as the cold sweat drying on his skin. He did not sleep that night. He sat on the cot with the lamp burning, listening to the sounds of the town, listening to the music drifting from the saloon, the laughter of the dead. When dawn came, pale and hesitant, he felt no relief. He washed his face in the basin, dressed in his work clothes, and went to the mine. Dutch Harrison assigned him to a crew working deep in the shaft, reinforcing a section of tunnel that showed signs of instability. It was dark work, claustrophobic work, the kind that made a man's muscles scream and his lungs ache from breathing dust. But Mercer welcomed it. It kept his mind occupied. It kept him from thinking about what he had seen. At midday, the crew broke for lunch. They sat in a circle near the mouth of the shaft, eating hardtack and beans, drinking water that tasted of metal. Mercer found himself sitting next to a man named Garrett, an older worker with a beard gone mostly gray and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "How long have you been in Desolation Flats?" Mercer asked him. Garrett chewed slowly, thinking. "Going on 3 years now," he said. "Came out from Missouri after my wife passed. Figured I had nothing left to lose." He paused, and Mercer could see something working behind the man's eyes, some memory or pain that he was deciding whether to share. "She died in childbirth," Garrett continued quietly. "The baby, too, a boy. We had already picked out a name, Samuel, after my father. But he never drew a breath in this world. And my wife, she bled out before the doctor could do anything to help her. I buried them together in the cemetery outside Joplin. Then I sold everything I owned and came west. Seemed like there was no point in staying in a place filled with ghosts. The irony of that statement hung in the air between them. Mercer took another bite of hardtack, not knowing what to say. After a moment, Garrett spat tobacco juice and continued. I thought distance would help. Thought if I put enough miles between me and that grave, the pain would ease. But it does not work that way. You carry it with you, no matter how far you run. The ghosts follow. They always follow. Mercer nodded. He took a bite of hardtack and let the silence stretch for a moment. Then he said, as casually as he could manage, "You ever been inside the Silver Spur Saloon?" Garrett stopped chewing. He stared at Mercer for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spat a wad of tobacco juice onto the ground. "No," he said, "and I would advise you to stay clear of it as well." "Why? What is it?" Garrett looked around, making sure none of the other workers were listening. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "That place belongs to the dead," he said. "Has been that way for as long as I have been here. Maybe longer. Silas Crane, the man who runs it, he made some kind of bargain. Do not ask me with what. I do not know, and I do not want to know. But the saloon only opens at midnight, and the only customers it serves are men who died with unfinished business, debts unpaid, promises broken, sins unconfessed. They come back, night after night, trying to find whatever it was they lost when they crossed over." Mercer felt his mouth go dry. "Have you seen them?" "I have seen what comes out of that place when the night is over," Garrett said. "I have seen things that should not walk, should not breathe. And I will tell you this, whatever you do, whatever happens, do not go back there. Do not try to understand it. Some doors, once you open them, you cannot close again." They finished their lunch in silence. Mercer wanted to ask more questions, wanted to press for details, but he could see that Garrett had said all he was willing to say. The old man stood, brushed the dust from his trousers, and headed back into the mine. Mercer followed, and for the rest of the day he worked without speaking, his mind churning through everything he had heard. That evening he returned to the boarding house and found Mrs. Calloway in the parlor, mending a shirt by lamplight. She looked up as he entered, her needle pausing in mid-stitch. "You look troubled, Mr. Mercer," she said. He hesitated, then sat down across from her. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "what can you tell me about the Silver Spur Saloon?" Her face hardened. "I can tell you to mind your own affairs," she said sharply. "I can tell you that there are things in this town that are best left alone." "I have already been inside," he said. "Last night, I saw what is there." Mrs. Calloway set down her sewing. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. "Then you know more than you should," she said, "and you will have to live with that knowledge. How long has it been like this?" "Longer than I have been here," she said. "Longer than anyone can remember. My husband, God rest his soul, he tried to find out. He thought there must be some explanation, some rational cause. He went into the saloon one night, just like you did. He came back, changed. He would not speak of what he saw. He would not tell me what happened. 2 weeks later, he put his pistol in his mouth and ended his life. I found him in our bedroom, his blood all over the walls." Mercer felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I am sorry," he said. "Do not be sorry," she said. "Be smart. Leave this place. Go back to wherever you came from. Find work in another town. There is nothing for you here but misery and madness. I cannot just leave," he said. "I have no money. I need this job." Mrs. Calloway picked up her sewing again. "Then stay away from the saloon," she said. "Work your shifts, save your pay, and get out as soon as you are able. That is the only advice I can give you." He went upstairs to his room and sat by the window as darkness fell. He told himself he would take her advice. He would avoid the Silver Spur. He would keep his head down, do his work, and leave Desolation Flats as soon as he had enough money for a train ticket east. He would put this place behind him and never think of it again. But even as he made these promises to himself, he knew he would not keep them. There was something pulling at him, some Ned to understand. He had spent years trying to make sense of the war, trying to find meaning in the senseless violence he had witnessed. And here, in this forgotten town in the Nevada desert, he had stumbled upon something even more inexplicable. Death that would not stay buried. Ghosts that drank and laughed and played cards as if they were still among the living. At midnight, the doors of the Silver Spur opened again. He watched from his window as the light bloomed in the darkness, watched as shadows moved across the glass. And this time, he did not go downstairs. He simply watched and listened, the piano music drifting up to him like smoke. This became his routine. He worked at the mine during the day, his hands growing calloused from handling timber and tools. He ate his meals in silence. He spoke to no one, unless necessary. And every night, he sat at his window and watched the Silver Spur Saloon come to life. He began to notice patterns. The same men appeared night after night, sitting at the same tables, playing the same games. One figure in particular caught his attention, a young man, perhaps 20 years old, who always sat alone at a table near the back. He would order a bottle of whiskey and drink steadily throughout the night, never speaking to anyone, never looking up from his glass. There was something about his posture, the set of his shoulders, that suggested a deep and abiding sorrow. Mercer found himself watching this young man more than the others, wondering who he had been, what had brought him to this state, what unfinished business kept him chained to the Silver Spur night after night. 3 weeks passed, then 4. The work at the mine continued. The silver vein showed no signs of running out. Dutch Harrison seemed pleased with Mercer's work and told him there would be employment for as long as he wanted it. Mercer saved most of his pay, keeping the money in a leather pouch hidden beneath the floorboards of his room. He calculated that in another month, he would have enough to leave, to buy a ticket to San Francisco, or perhaps back east to St. Louis, somewhere far from Nevada and its ghosts. But he had not left yet, and every night he watched the saloon. It was in his 6th week in Desolation Flats that things changed. It was a Saturday night, and Mercer had spent the day repairing a collapsed section of shaft. The work had been brutal, and he was exhausted. He lay down on his cot, fully clothed, intending to rest for just a few minutes before washing up for dinner. But the exhaustion pulled him under, and he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. He woke to the sound of knocking. For a moment he was disoriented, unsure of where he was or what time it was. Then he realized someone was at his door, rapping softly but insistently. He rose and opened it, expecting to find Mrs. Calloway, or perhaps another boarder. Instead, he found himself face to face with the young man from the saloon, the one who sat alone every night, drinking in silence. Up close, Mercer could see the details he had missed from a distance. The young man's clothes were from another era, the style of the 1860s. His face was pale, almost translucent in the lamplight. There was a bullet hole in his chest, just left of center, a dark stain surrounding it like a flower of blood. The young man looked at Mercer with eyes that held a terrible sadness. "You can see us," he said. His voice was hollow, like wind through a broken window. "You are one of the few who can." Mercer wanted to slam the door, wanted to push the washstand back against it and hide until morning, but he could not move. He stood frozen, staring at this impossible visitor. "What do you want?" he managed to whisper. "I need you to deliver a message," the young man said. "I need you to find someone for me. Someone who is still alive. Who? The young man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, brittle with age. He held it out to Mercer. "Her name is written here," he said, "along with the last address I had for her. I do not know if she is still there. I do not even know if she is still alive. But I need you to try. I need you to find her and tell her something." Mercer took the paper. His hands were shaking. "What do you want me to tell her?" The young man's eyes glistened, and Mercer realized with horror that the dead could still weep. "Tell her that I am sorry," he said. "Tell her that I did not mean to leave her. Tell her that I think of her every night, that she is the only thing that keeps me from fading away completely. Tell her that I loved her, that I still love her, that I will love her until there is nothing left of me but dust and regret." "Who are you?" Mercer asked. "My name is Daniel Whitmore," the young man said. "I died in this town 7 years ago, shot in a dispute over a card game I did not even want to play. I left behind a fiancé in Sacramento. We were supposed to be married in the spring. I never got the chance to say goodbye." Mercer looked down at the paper in his hand. The name written there was Elizabeth Harrington, and the address was on K Street in Sacramento. He looked back up at Daniel Whitmore, at this ghost standing in his doorway, and felt something shift inside him, a decision being made without his conscious choice. "I will do it," he said. "I will find her and give her your message." Daniel's face transformed. The sorrow lifted just for a moment, replaced by something that might have been hope. "Thank you," he said. "You cannot know what this means to me, what it might mean for my soul." "Why me?" Mercer asked. "Why did you come to me?" "Because you are not afraid," Daniel said. "Not truly. I have watched you watching us. You are curious. You want to understand. And that makes you different from the others. Most people flee from what they do not understand. But you move toward it. That takes courage, or perhaps foolishness. I am not sure which." Before Mercer could respond, Daniel turned and walked away, disappearing down the stairs. Mercer stepped into the hallway and looked after him, but the ghost was already gone. He returned to his room and closed the door, then sat on the cot and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was elegant, careful, the work of someone educated. Elizabeth Harrington, K Street, Sacramento, California. Below that was a short note. "My dearest Elizabeth, if you are reading this, then I am gone. Please know that you were the light of my life, and losing you is my deepest regret. Yours always, Daniel." Mercer read the note 3 times, then folded it and placed it in his shirt pocket, next to his heart. He lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling, thinking about what he had agreed to do. He had no reason to trust a ghost, no reason to believe that delivering this message would make any difference. But he had given his word, and he had been raised to believe that a man's word meant something. The next morning, he went to the telegraph office and sent a message to Sacramento, asking if anyone knew of an Elizabeth Harrington on K Street. He did not expect a response, but 3 days later, one came. The telegram was brief. "Elizabeth Harrington still resides at the address provided. She is a school teacher, unmarried." Mercer read the telegram and felt his pulse quicken. She was still there, still alive, still waiting, perhaps, for a man who would never return. He began to plan. He would need to go to Sacramento in person. A telegram would not suffice for a message like this. He counted his savings and realized he had enough for the journey. Barely. It would mean leaving Desolation Flats, abandoning the job at the mine, giving up the steady income. But something told him this was more important, that delivering Daniel Whitmore's message might be the most significant thing he ever did. He gave Dutch Harrison 2 weeks' notice. The foreman was not happy, but accepted the resignation without argument. Men came and went in the mining camps. It was the nature of the work. Mercer spent those final 2 weeks finishing up his tasks, making sure the structures he had built were solid and safe. And every night, he continued to watch the Silver Spur Saloon, looking for Daniel Whitmore among the crowd of the dead. He saw him only once more, on his last night in Desolation Flats. The young man sat at his usual table, the bottle of whiskey in front of him. But this time, he looked up and met Mercer's eyes across the distance. He raised his glass in a silent salute, and Mercer nodded in return. A promise acknowledged, a covenant made. The journey to Sacramento took 4 days. Mercer traveled by stage to Carson City, then by train to the coast. The stage ride was brutal. 18 hours of being thrown about in a wooden box on wheels, breathing dust, feeling every rotten stone in the road. The other passengers were a mix of miners heading home with their earnings, merchants traveling to sell their wares, and a woman in a black dress who never spoke and never looked up from her folded hands. At one point, the stage stopped at a way station in the middle of nowhere, just a shack and a corral where fresh horses waited. Mercer climbed down to stretch his legs and relieve himself. While he stood there in the darkness, looking up at the stars that blazed overhead with a brilliance he had never seen back east, he heard the woman in black speaking to the station keeper. "My husband died last month," she was saying, "killed in a mine collapse near Virginia City. I am going home to my family. I do not know what I will do now. I do not know how to be a widow." The station keeper muttered something sympathetic, and the woman thanked him in a voice barely above a whisper. Mercer stood in the shadows, listening, and felt a kinship with this stranger. They were both carrying the weight of death, both traveling through a landscape of grief. The train from Carson City was faster, but no more comfortable. The cars were crowded with travelers, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and coal smoke. Mercer sat by a window and watched the landscape change as they descended from the mountains toward the valley. The desert gave way to hills covered in dry grass. The grass gave way to fields and orchards. By the time they reached Sacramento, the world had transformed completely. Everything was green and alive, nourished by water from the Sierra snowmelt. It felt like a different country entirely. He spent the nights in cheap hotels, eating sparingly, conserving his funds. In one hotel in a town whose name he did not catch, he lay awake, listening to a couple arguing in the next room. The woman was crying, begging the man not to leave. The man was shouting, saying he had had enough, that he was going to San Francisco whether she came with him or not. Mercer pressed a pillow over his head to block out the sounds, but he could still hear them, voices raised in anger and desperation. In the morning when he left, he saw the woman sitting alone in the hotel parlor, her eyes red from crying, staring at nothing. Death and loss and heartbreak. It was everywhere. The frontier was full of it. Perhaps the whole world was. When he finally arrived in Sacramento, it was late afternoon, and the city was alive with activity. Horse-drawn carriages clattered through the streets. Vendors called out their wares. The smell of the river mixed with the scent of cooking food and coal smoke. He found K Street and walked along it until he located the address from Daniel's note. It was a modest house, painted white with green shutters, set back from the street behind a small garden. Flowers bloomed in neat rows. A cat sat on the porch railing, watching him with slitted eyes. Mercer stood at the gate for a long moment, gathering his courage. Then he walked up the path and knocked on the door. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened, and a woman stood before him. She was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair pinned up and kind brown eyes. She wore a simple dress of blue calico and held a book in one hand. as if he had interrupted her reading. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Are you Elizabeth Harrington?" He said. "I am." Her expression became cautious. "Who are you?" "My name is Thomas Mercer," he said. "I have come from Nevada, from a town called Desolation Flats. I have a message for you, from Daniel Whitmore." The book fell from her hand and struck the floor with a thud. Her face went pale. "Daniel," she whispered. "How do you know that name?" "May I come in?" Mercer asked. "What I have to tell you, it would be better said in private." She hesitated, then stepped back and gestured for him to enter. He followed her into a small parlor. The room was neat and clean, filled with books and the scent of lavender. She picked up the fallen book, set it on a table, and then turned to face him. Her hands were trembling. "Daniel died 7 years ago," she said. "He went to Nevada to make his fortune. He was going to come back and marry me, but he was killed in some kind of altercation. I received a letter from the undertaker in a place called Desolation Flats. They sent his belongings back to his family. I never heard anything more." Mercer reached into his pocket and pulled out the note. He held it out to her. "He asked me to give you this," he said, "and to tell you that he is sorry, that he did not mean to leave you, that he thinks of you every night, that he loved you, that he still loves you." Elizabeth took the note with shaking hands. She unfolded it and read the words written there, and as she did, tears began to stream down her face. She pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered. "Oh, my dear Daniel." Mercer stood there, not knowing what to do or say. He felt like an intruder in this moment of grief, but Elizabeth opened her eyes and looked at him, and there was gratitude in her expression. "How did you?" she began, then stopped. "How did you get this message? How did you know to bring it to me?" He told her everything, about the Silver Spur Saloon, about the dead men who gathered there each night, about Daniel Whitmore, sitting alone at his table, carrying the weight of his unfinished love. He told her about the bullet hole in Daniel's chest, the sorrow in his eyes, the way he had asked Mercer to find her. Elizabeth listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Do you believe in God, Mr. Mercer?" "I do not know," he said honestly. "I used to, before the war, but I saw too much death, too much suffering. It made me question whether there was any divine plan, any justice in the world." "I believe," Elizabeth said quietly. "I have to believe, because if there is no God, then there is no hope of seeing Daniel again, no hope of telling him that I never stopped loving him, that I have waited for him all these years, even knowing he was gone. Do you think he knows?" "I think he knows," Mercer said. "I think that is why he is still there, why he cannot move on, because a part of him is here with you." Elizabeth walked to a cabinet and opened a drawer. She pulled out a small leather box and brought it back to Mercer. Inside the box was a photograph, a young man in formal dress, standing stiffly for the camera. "Daniel Whitmore," she said. "This was taken just before he left for Nevada. He promised me he would come back. He promised." Mercer looked at the photograph and felt a chill run through him. It was the same face he had seen in the saloon, the same sad eyes. "He is trapped," Mercer said. "He cannot leave because he never said goodbye to you. He never fulfilled his promise." "What can I do?" Elizabeth asked. "How can I help him?" Mercer thought about this for a long moment. "I do not know," he said finally. "But perhaps if you let him go, if you tell him that you forgive him for leaving, that you release him from his promise, maybe that would be enough." "How can I tell him?" she said. "He is in Nevada. I am here. There is no way to reach him." "Write him a letter," Mercer said. "I will take it back to Desolation Flats. I will read it to him. I will make sure he hears your words." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will do that." She moved to a writing desk and took out paper and pen. Mercer waited while she composed the letter. It took her nearly an hour, and he could see her pause several times, wiping away tears. When she finally finished, she folded the letter and sealed it with wax. She handed it to Mercer. "Please," she said, "please make sure he knows that I never blamed him, that I understand, that I want him to find peace." "I will," Mercer said. "I promise." He left Sacramento the next morning and began the long journey back to Nevada. The letter from Elizabeth Harrington was in his coat pocket, and he guarded it as carefully as if it were made of gold. He traveled through the same landscape in reverse. The green valleys giving way to brown hills, the brown hills giving way to desert, the air growing thinner and drier, the sky becoming harder and more distant. When he finally arrived back in Desolation Flats, it was late evening. The town looked exactly as he had left it. Nothing had changed. He went directly to the boarding house and found that his old room was still available. Mrs. Calloway gave him a long look when he asked for it. "I thought you had left for good," she said. "So did I," Mercer replied. He waited in his room as the hours passed. He did not eat, did not drink. He simply sat on the cot with the letter in his hand, watching the darkness gather. And at midnight, when the doors of the Silver Spur Saloon swung open, he rose and walked out into the street. This time, when he entered the saloon, the dead did not ignore him. They turned to look as he walked through the door, their hollow eyes tracking his movement. But they did not speak, did not interfere. They simply watched as he crossed the room toward the table where Daniel Whitmore sat. Daniel looked up as Mercer approached. His expression was one of desperate hope. "Did you find her?" he asked. "I did," Mercer said. He pulled out the letter and held it up. "She wanted me to give you this. She wanted you to hear her words." Daniel reached for the letter with trembling hands, but his fingers passed through it like smoke. He could not touch it. He could not hold it. He looked up at Mercer with despair in his eyes. "Will you read it to me?" he asked. Mercer sat down across from him and broke the wax seal. He unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. "My dearest Daniel," it began, "I have carried you in my heart every day since you left. I have never stopped loving you, never stopped thinking of you. When I heard that you had died, a part of me died with you. I stopped wearing colors. I stopped going to church socials. I stopped believing that I would ever feel joy again. But time passes, even when we do not want it to. Seasons change. The world continues, and slowly, so slowly, I learned to live with the hole you left in my life. I learned to wake up each morning and find reasons to keep going. My students, my garden, the small kindnesses of friends who did not abandon me, even when I withdrew into my grief." Mercer paused, glancing up at Daniel. The ghost was utterly still, his eyes fixed on Mercer's face, drinking in every word. Around them, the saloon had gone silent. Even the piano player had stopped mid-note, his hands hovering above the keys. Every ghost in the room was listening now, leaning forward in their chairs, desperate to hear what came next, as if Elizabeth's words were not just for Daniel, but for all of them. As if every man there was hoping for some message of his own, some proof that someone in the world of the living still remembered them, still cared. Mercer continued reading. "I know that you did not choose to leave me. I know that you would have come back if you could, and I want you to know that I forgive you for leaving, for not being able to keep your promise, for all the years we lost. I have spent so long being angry at you for going to Nevada, angry at the man who shot you, angry at God for allowing it to happen. But anger is a poison, Daniel. It eats away at you from the inside until there is nothing left but bitterness and regret. I do not want to be bitter anymore. I do not want to spend whatever time I have left consumed by what might have been." A sound came from somewhere in the saloon, a soft sob. Mercer looked up and saw that one of the ghosts, an older man with a gray beard and a bullet wound in his temple, was crying. Tears streamed down his translucent face, leaving tracks in the dust that covered his skin. Others looked away, unable to meet Mercer's eyes, their own faces twisted with emotions they thought they had left behind when they died. Mercer turned back to the letter. "So I release you from any obligation you feel toward me." He read, "I want you to find peace. I want you to rest. You have been gone for 7 years now, Daniel. 7 years of waiting, of being trapped between worlds. That is long enough, too long. Let go of me. Let go of this world. Move on to whatever comes next. And when my time comes, when I cross over into whatever lies beyond, I hope I will see you again. I hope we will have the chance to finish what we began. But until then, you must go. You must be free. This is my final gift to you. My love, my blessing, my goodbye. Go with my love. Go with my gratitude for the time we had together. Go with the knowledge that you made my life brighter, even if only for a little while. Yours always, yours forever, Elizabeth." Mercer finished reading and looked up. Daniel Whitmore was weeping, tears streaming down his translucent face. He tried to speak, but could not. He simply sat there, his shoulders shaking, overcome by an emotion too large for words. Around them, the other dead had fallen silent. The piano had stopped playing. Every ghost in the saloon was watching, listening, as if they too could feel the weight of what was happening, as if they too longed for such release. Daniel finally managed to speak. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for this gift. You have given me what I needed most, the knowledge that she is well, that she does not hate me, that she has moved on." "What will you do now?" Mercer asked. Daniel stood up from the table. He looked around the saloon at the other ghosts, at Silas Crane standing behind the bar. Then he looked back at Mercer. "I am going to leave," he said. "I am going to walk out of this place and see where the road takes me. I have been here too long, held myself here by my own guilt and grief, but I do not need to anymore. Elizabeth has set me free." He turned and walked toward the door. As he moved, his form began to change, to fade. By the time he reached the threshold, he was barely visible, just a suggestion of a shape against the darkness. And then he was gone, dissolved into the night, like morning mist under the sun. Mercer sat alone at the table, the letter still in his hand. He felt drained, emptied out, as if he had run for miles. But there was also something else, a sense of accomplishment, of having done something that mattered. He had helped a lost soul find peace. Perhaps that was worth all the fear and confusion and sleepless nights. Around him, the saloon began to come back to life. The piano started playing again, but the melody was different now, softer, less mournful. The conversations resumed, but they were quieter, more subdued. The ghosts moved differently too, Mercer noticed, less stiffly, as if something had shifted in the atmosphere of the place, and then one of them stood up and walked over to his table. It was the man with the rope burn around his neck, the one whose head tilted at that broken angle. Up close, Mercer could see that he had been young when he died, perhaps 25. His clothes were those of a cowhand, worn denim and a faded shirt. He stood beside Mercer's table and looked down at him with eyes that held both hope and hesitation. "I heard what you did for Daniel Whitmore," the ghost said. His voice was hoarse, damaged by the rope that had killed him. "I was wondering if perhaps you might be willing to help others. There are many of us here who have people we need to reach, messages we need to send." Mercer looked up at him. Before he could answer, another ghost approached, then another. Within moments, he was surrounded by the dead, all of them looking at him with that same desperate hope. A miner with his chest caved in. A gambler with a knife wound in his back. A soldier still wearing his Union blue, one arm missing at the shoulder. Each of them waiting, watching, wanting. Silas Crane appeared beside the table. He put a hand on the shoulder of the hanged man and gently pulled him back. "That is enough," Crane said firmly. "Mr. Mercer is not your salvation. He helped one man. Do not expect him to save you all." But the ghosts did not move away. They stood in a circle around Mercer, silent and pleading. And Mercer understood, in that moment, the full weight of what he had done. He had shown them that escape was possible, that there was a way out of this purgatory they inhabited, and now they all wanted what Daniel had gotten. Release, peace, an end to their waiting. "I cannot help you all," Mercer said quietly. "I do not have the time. I do not have the resources. I am sorry." The ghosts slowly dispersed, returning to their tables, their card games, their endless vigil. But the damage was done. Mercer could feel their eyes on him for the rest of the night, could feel their hunger for what he represented, a connection to the living world, a bridge between the two realms. Silas Crane approached the table. He set down a glass and poured whiskey into it. "On the house," he said, "for services rendered." Mercer looked up at the proprietor. "How long have you been running this place?" he asked. Crane smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Longer than you would believe," he said. "Longer than I care to remember." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from Mercer, something he had not done before. The lamplight caught his face from a different angle, and Mercer noticed things he had missed earlier. The way Crane's skin had a faint translucence to it, like old parchment. The way his eyes, those pale gray eyes, seemed to look through Mercer rather than at him. "You are like them," Mercer said. "You are dead too." Crane nodded slowly. "I died in 1829, he said. 45 years ago. I was a gambler in St. Louis. A good one. I won more than I lost, and I lived well because of it. But I made the mistake of cheating the wrong man. A riverboat captain named Hollis. He caught me dealing from the bottom of the deck and shot me in an alley behind a brothel. I died in the mud, bleeding out, while the rain washed my blood into the gutter. It was not a noble death, not a heroic one, just stupid and senseless and final." He paused, studying the amber liquid in Mercer's glass. "Or so I thought," he continued. "But then I woke up. Not in heaven, not in hell, somewhere in between. I found myself here, in this place that should not exist, this saloon that opens its doors to those who cannot rest. And I was given a choice. I could stay and wait, like the others. Wait for something to change, for someone to come and give me the closure I needed. Or I could run this place, serve the others, help them in whatever small way I could. I chose service. I thought it might earn me some kind of redemption, some way out of this limbo. Has it?" Mercer asked. Crane laughed, a sound without humor. "No," he said. "I am still here, still pouring drinks for the dead, still watching them come and go, night after night, year after year. But perhaps that is my purpose. Perhaps I am meant to be the keeper of this place, the shepherd of lost souls. It is not a grand purpose, but it is something." "Why do some of them leave and others stay?" Mercer asked. Crane considered this. "Each man carries his own chains," he said. "Some chains are forged from love, like Daniel Whitmore's. Others from guilt, from anger, from unfinished business of 1,000 different kinds. The only way to break the chains is to find whatever it is that binds you, and face it, accept it, let it go. Daniel could not leave because he had not said goodbye to the woman he loved. You gave him that chance. You freed him. But not all chains can be broken so easily. Some men have been here for decades. some since before I arrived. They will likely be here long after I am gone, assuming I ever am. What about you? Mercer asked. What chains bind you? Crane's smile turned bitter. Guilt, he said. I killed a man once, not the riverboat captain who killed me. Someone else, a miner up in the California hills. He had won a fortune in a poker game, and I wanted it. So I followed him out of the saloon where we had been playing, and I put a knife in his back. I took his money and left him to die in the dirt. I never knew his name, never learned if he had a family, never even thought about it until after I died. But now I think about it every night. Every time I see one of these men, these ghosts who died with regrets, I think about the man I murdered. And I wonder if he is out there somewhere, trapped like I am, waiting for someone to help him find peace. Have you tried to find out? Mercer asked. How? Crane said. I do not even know where he is buried, do not know where to begin looking. So I stay here, and I wait, and I serve the dead. It is my penance, my punishment, my only purpose. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Crane stood, picked up the whiskey bottle, and returned to the bar. Mercer watched him go, thinking about chains and guilt and the weight of the past, thinking about how many men carried that weight, living and dead alike. Mercer sat there for a while longer, sipping the whiskey, feeling the burn of it in his throat. Then he stood and walked out of the Silver Spur Saloon for the last time. He left Desolation Flats the next morning. There was nothing keeping him there anymore. He had fulfilled his promise to Daniel Whitmore, and that was enough. He traveled east, toward cities and civilization, toward places where the living outnumbered the dead. He found work in Denver, and later in Omaha. He married eventually, a quiet woman who worked as a seamstress, and they had 3 children together. He never told anyone about what he had seen in Nevada, about the saloon that opened at midnight for customers who were no longer alive. But sometimes, on cold nights when the wind was right, he would hear it, the tinny sound of piano music, the laughter of men who should be silent, and he would remember Daniel Whitmore's face, the gratitude in his eyes, the way he had faded into nothing, finally free. Years later, when Thomas Mercer was an old man with white hair and hands gnarled by arthritis, he received a letter. It was postmarked from Sacramento and written in a shaky but still elegant hand. Dear Mr. Mercer, it began, I do not know if you remember me. I am Elizabeth Harrington, or I was. I married a few years after you brought me Daniel's message. I have children now, and grandchildren. I have lived a full life, but I wanted you to know that I have never forgotten what you did for me, for us. You gave me closure. You gave me peace, and for that I will be eternally grateful. I wanted you to know that I am dying. The doctors say I have perhaps a month left, and I am not afraid, because I believe, truly believe, that when I cross over, Daniel will be waiting for me, that we will finally have the chance to finish what we began so many years ago. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Thank you for being the bridge between the living and the dead, for being brave enough to walk through that darkness and bring light with you. May God bless you and keep you all the days of your life. With deepest gratitude, Elizabeth. Mercer held the letter for a long time, reading and rereading the words. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in a box with his other important documents. The note from Daniel, the photograph Elizabeth had shown him, the few mementos he had kept from those strange weeks in Nevada. That night, he dreamed. He was standing outside the Silver Spur Saloon in Desolation Flats. The doors were open, and light spilled out onto the street. But this time, the light was different. It was warm and golden, like sunlight rather than lamplight. And standing in the doorway, holding hands, were Daniel Whitmore and Elizabeth Harrington. They were young again, the way they had been before death and time had taken their toll. They were smiling, and as Mercer watched, they turned and walked into the light together, and the doors closed behind them. He woke with tears on his face, and he knew somehow that Elizabeth had crossed over, that she had found Daniel waiting for her, just as she had believed, that they were together again, free from the weight of the world. Thomas Mercer died 3 months later, peacefully in his sleep. His family buried him in a cemetery in Omaha, beneath a simple headstone that bore his name and the dates of his birth and death. But those who knew him, those who had heard the stories he sometimes told late at night, when the whiskey had loosened his tongue, they said that he had not truly died, that a part of him still walked the frontier, helping lost souls find their way home, that if you listened carefully on quiet nights, you could hear his footsteps on the old roads, the sound of a man moving through the darkness with a message of hope tucked close to his heart. There are places in the American frontier where the living and the dead share the same dust, the same silence, the same thirst. Desolation Flats was such a place, and some say it still is. The Silver Spur Saloon still stands, or so the stories claim. And at midnight, when the living are asleep and the stars are cold and distant, the doors swing open, the piano begins to play, and the dead gather once more to drink and remember and wait for whatever comes next. Because some doors, once opened, can never truly close. Some debts can never truly be paid, and some loves endure beyond death itself, bright and burning and eternal as the desert sun.